Hi folks, my name is Daniel McPherson and I'm from Attini Software. Thanks for spending a little time with me on this virtual presentation called An Introduction to Social Computing. The reason we've put it together is to give you a little background on how Attini Software looks at SharePoint and the social computing sphere, and hopefully give you a few ideas about how you can position social computing inside your organizations. So what is social computing? Like me, you probably felt it sounded a little oxymoronic, a bit like a green stop sign. Social being the last thing you think of when you're talking about computing. And unfortunately, as a term, it's been incredibly overused. Everyone seems to be talking about how their product or their service is social, and everything seems to have a social component. And so I think that one of the most important things that I'd like to get across in this presentation is that behind all of that, behind the marketing and snake oil, there are actually some significant benefits to be had. There's substance behind social computing. And if I was to boil it down to just a single sentence that describes what social computing means to me, then I think that would be to say that social computing is effectively where the knowledge management train has dropped us off. In the past, wherever we used to talk about knowledge management, in the future, we'll be talking about social computing. So let's drill into this in a little more detail. In the old days, innovation in knowledge management typically happened inside of big organizations. And that's because that's where largely the problem existed. They wanted to move the knowledge and experience from one person into another person. But the other reason why innovation happened here is because this is where the people, the large mass of people existed. They had a network connecting them, and they had software on which to innovate on top of. Somewhere over the last 3 to 4 years, a serious shift has happened in that instead of that knowledge management innovation happening inside of organizations, that innovation is now happening outside of organizations. And it's happening on the internet, and it's happening by people just like you. You see, we're the ones with the knowledge management problem. And we have the people all connected through a global network called the internet, using software running in the cloud that has creative ways of solving problems which we could never have imagined in the past. And all of this together is no longer called knowledge management. These solutions, this innovation, is now called social computing. Now you might ask how I can feel so confident that the innovation in knowledge management is now happening outside of companies and not inside. And I think the best example I can give you is the fact that I can now share my photos with my mother. I've lived on the other side of the planet to my mother for the last 10 years, and only now, with the emergence of Facebook, have I actually been able to share with her my photos. And when you think about it, photos are really just one form of knowledge. Documents, videos and blogs, these are all other forms of knowledge, and all of them are made a lot easier and a lot more effective through the application of social technologies. Let's take a closer look at one important way that we share knowledge and how it might be affected by the introduction of social technologies. Communication. On the slide here, you'll see some typical ways that we communicate with people inside of our organizations. We have instant messaging, email, telephone, and perhaps around the water cooler via talking. Now, all of these mechanisms for communicating, they all work effectively when it's just you talking to your colleagues. But how does that scale up? How does that work when we need to try and communicate with people in the entire organization? I think you'll find that many of these start to break down. So let's add some social and see what happens. Here you can see we're no longer talking just to our colleague, but we're talking to our team, our department, our organizational unit, or even the whole company. It may just be that we have a piece of knowledge we want to share more effectively, and we're not sure exactly who it is we're going to be sharing it to. Instant messaging doesn't work at these sorts of scale. We need some sort of alternative. And so an alternative to instant messaging is potentially using Twitter. An alternative to email is using blogging. An alternative to using the telephone is to replace some of those with the technology called podcasting. And perhaps those meetings, those conversations we have with people, perhaps you can capture some of those and turn them into a video. The end result of doing all this is we move away from a personal-based communication to a social-based communication, one that is much more effective at communicating the knowledge you have. At this point, I'd like to ask you a question. Is it as easy for people in your organization to publish something to the intranet as it is for them to send an email? I ask this question whenever I do an event and talk about social computing, and the answer is always the same. It's always easier for people to send an email. And that's incredible, given that we've had intranets for as long as we have. And it's incredible, given that when you talk to a CIO or someone responsible for knowledge in an organization, they will typically complain that their biggest problem is that the knowledge inside of the organization is locked away inside people's inboxes, and they'd really like a more effective way of getting that out. Moving on from there, I'd encourage you to do a little thought experiment, and that is to imagine that we're running out of keystrokes. Imagine that keystrokes are non-renewable and that one day you simply won't be able to type. With that thought in mind, just start to think about how your behavior might change, how you might maximize the impact of every keystroke that you make. I think you'll find that you'll write less emails and you'll start to write a lot more blogs. I think adding social computing techniques to communication means that we're able to more effectively share knowledge. But I think there's another really good example, and that is in dealing with information overload. So when I'm faced with a new challenge or a new problem, I like to look into the past and see if a similar problem was faced, and if so, how it was solved. And with information overload, I think of the printing press. I imagine a number of people crowded around the printing press, elbows up on the side of it, sort of thinking, well, it's fantastic that we've got all these books, but how could I possibly read them all? And so the more things change, the more they stay the same. People then had an information overload problem. So I think social computing here can also come to the rescue. We can apply social techniques to solve this information overload problem, and it's actually in much the same way that we solve the problem with books. There are a couple of social things that emerged that helps us to deal with and choose which books we read. So it's a little bit like a book club. A book club you join, and you join it because you want to find books that you like and find books you're interested in, and you do that by leveraging the relationships we have with people. And it's also exactly the same with book reviewers. You select a book reviewer whose opinion you trust, and by doing this, you cut down the total amount of information that you have to deal with. So here's how it works. Social computing allows us to make content better every single time we interact with it. Even if we view a piece of content on our intranet, the act of viewing that piece of content is actually enhancing that content. It's making it better. And the way it's making it better is that it's increasing the number of views that particular content has received. And the number of views that a particular piece of content gets does tell you whether that's a piece of content that other people have found interesting enough to at least visit. Social computing defines a number of these different types of interactions we can have with content, and all of them make that content better. So whether you're viewing it, you're commenting on it, you're sharing it, retweeting it, liking it, favoriting it, editing it, rating it, linking it, or tagging it, all of those things go together to make that content better. And when you're doing all of those things together, then you can really start to make the best content bubble to the top. And that makes dealing with information overload a whole lot easier. So folks, thanks very much for spending a bit of time with me here today. I hope it's been a useful introduction to social computing. Attini Software spends a lot of time working on these problems, and we'd very much like to introduce you to the suite of products which we've just released. It's the Attini Social Suite, and within that suite we have Attini Blogging, Attini Badges, which is a great way of driving user adoption socially inside your organization, the Attini Engine, which is about aggregating content across your SharePoint farms, Attini Apps, an app store for SharePoint, and Attini News. Fundamentally, each of these solutions is about bringing the innovation that's happening on the internet today inside the firewall so all of our organizations can benefit from it. I'm available via email. My email address is there on the screen right now. You can also find me on Twitter, DanMC, or if you like, add me to Skype. I'm always more than happy to talk about social computing. Thanks very much.